All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. So we got a brand new webinar all set up for us to do. So I see a lot of familiar people. I think that I've had a lot of you join on Tuesday this week as well, which is great. But I'm going to give the same spiel that I gave on Tuesday, just in case there's any new people today. So this webinar is on behalf of Science Literacy Week, which is occurring all week this week. And this is the third Supernova event for that event. Science Literacy Week is to showcase diversity of Canadian science and its culture, and it's all about everyone's unique experience and relationship with science and how they live it. So this year's theme is biodiversity, so you'll be seeing a lot of really cool biodiversity-themed webinars and activities that we're going to be doing this week. Hopefully, most of you tuned in for the last few Supernova activities, as well as some other things that people have been putting on this week. So before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Emma, and I work on content for Science Literacy Week for Supernova. I'm in my third year at Dalhousie University, and I'm studying environmental science and oceanography. So if you guys don't know what this webinar is about, it's oceanography themed. So I think that I know a lot about this subject, so hopefully that you guys will learn a lot from me, and I'm really excited to teach you all about it. So I also want to learn a little bit about you, and I did this the other day as well. I'm just going to put up a poll, and it just says, what grade are you in? And I just kind of want to know a little bit about you guys. So I'm just going to type that up now, and then I will post that, and you guys can vote for what grade you're in so we can see what kind of people we've got here today. And then if you're younger or older than any of these, you can just pop that in the chat, and then I can see that as well. All right, so we've got lots of grade 3 and 4s here. We've got 2 grade 5 and 6, or 3 grade 5 and 6, and 2 grade 7 and 8. That's awesome. So we've got a really large array of people with us here today. That's awesome. Actually, I think we have at least one person in every single category. But the good thing about this webinar is that it is very inclusive to all ages. I'm sure that all of you will get something out of this. So I'm going to go over a little bit of our lesson plan for today. So we're going to start off with learning a little bit about intertidal ecosystems, which is our topic for the day. Then we're going to move on to a really fun activity that I planned out, and you guys don't need any materials at home, so it's completely accessible for all of you to do. And then we're going to finish off with a little lesson on Supernova's ROV, which is called Polaris, and we're going to watch some footage as it drives through the Halifax intertidal, which I think is going to be really, really cool. All right, so with that, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get started on the first activity for today. All right, so you guys let me know when you can see that. And I'm going to present that. So if someone can pop in the chat if they can see, that would be awesome. Okay, awesome. Looks like everyone can. Perfect. So as this slide says, we are going to talk about life in the intertidal and what that means. So starting off, what is the intertidal? Can anybody tell me what that is, if they've heard of it, or give an example of what lives there, or anything you know about the intertidal? I'd love to know. And I'll give you guys a few seconds to see if you can type anything you know about the intertidal in the chat. I'm also just going to turn off my video quickly just so you guys can get a better or clearer image of the screen. Isabel says hermit crabs live there, and that is completely correct. Yes, hermit crabs definitely live there, and we're going to talk about those a little bit later too. The tide pools, exactly. So if you've ever been to the Bay of Fundy, during low tide, there's a whole bunch of things called tide pools, which have organisms living in them, and we'll talk about those a little bit later as well. But yes, exactly, you're definitely on the right track. So I've gotten a few great answers. Save the animals, that's a good one as well. And we're going to move on to our next slide. So believe it or not, the intertidal of anywhere on the world is the harshest environment to live in the entire world. Does anybody know why that might be? Why do you think that the intertidal is such a difficult place to live in? So we'll talk a little bit more about the intertidal in a bit, but basically that is just the shoreline of any single spot where the ocean meets the land. So Ezra says waves. That's a really, really good answer. Wave action is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to live in the intertidal. That was a great answer. Yes, Isabel is right. So it's a spot where the tide goes in and out. So basically just any place where the ocean meets the shore. All right, so I think that I only saw Ezra's answer, but we will move on. Oh, William said something. He said because they get exposed to predators when the tide goes in and out, and that is a perfect answer as well. So there's actually 4 reasons why it's difficult for organisms to live there. A volcano interruption is not one of them, but that's a really good guess. All right, so let's talk about why. So there's 4 main points. The first thing is water is intermittent, and that's a pretty big word, but it really just means that water's not always there. So as the tide goes in and out, the ground gets exposed and then recovered by water. So can you imagine being an animal that can only breathe underwater and then having that water disappear sometimes? It's crazy. And then another thing that Ezra mentioned before is that intense wave action can actually dislodge organisms. So a lot of things that live on the intertidal have to hold on in order to stay put and to stay in their homes. But with wave action, that can actually cause them to break free and wash them out to sea where they can't survive as well. So that's another challenge of living on the intertidal. Another thing is that the temperature ranges are very large. So in the day when the sun is out, it gets really, really hot, and then at night, very, very cold, especially with that water splashing up on the shore all the time. It's really hard to survive and thrive in a place where temperature ranges are constantly fluctuating. Like imagine living somewhere where at night it got to -30, and then in the day it became 30 degrees Celsius. So that would be not very nice to live in. And then the 4th one is that salinity is very high, and salinity is just a word that means just extra salty. There's very high amounts of salt in the intertidal because it's very high evaporation rates because of how shallow the water is, and that leaves behind what we call salt deposits, which are just little piles of salt along the shoreline. So imagine being a really soft-bodied animal like a snail and going over a pile of salt. That would not feel very nice. So those are 4 of the main reasons why it's so difficult to live in the intertidal. So let's talk about the 4 zones of the intertidal. So this is how scientists like to classify the different levels of the intertidal zone. And we're going to talk about those right now. So usually they're separated in relation to how often they're submerged or not submerged in the water. So different organisms have adapted perfectly to the level of the intertidal that they inhabit, and they don't really move from that location. And then this phenomenon is called zonation. So when you go to the intertidal of really anywhere, so any beach or any rocky shoreline, you might see different strips of colors along the shoreline, and that's just because different animals live in each, or different animals and plants, I should say, live in each zone of that shoreline, and then that kind of shows up as a band of a specific color. So that's what we call zonation in the science community. I'm just reading your comments before I move on. Yes, salt is bad for snails. They do not like salt. It will really shrivel up their little bodies, so they have to adapt to that. We live near a little stream, and I think it's salt water. Well, there's a few ways to tell that, but you can really look at the animals that live inside there. All right, so I'm going to move on now. All right, so let's talk about the highest zone of the intertidal, which is called the spray zone. That's the area right above where the water lands at high tide. So this zone is only ever covered with water during storms, and it's never fully covered. So it's only ever being splashed by ocean waves. That's why it's called the spray zone. Some people also call it the splash zone. And only a couple organisms can live here. Lichen, like you see over here in the picture on the right, that green stuff, that's like kind of like moss. So that can live in the spray zone. And then periwinkles, which are actually snails, can also live in the spray zone. But those are really the only 2 organisms that are able to thrive there. Isabel says you can lick it. I don't recommend it because you don't know what's in that water, but you can definitely find other ways to figure out if it's salty. All right. So the next zone is called the high tide zone, and this is the highest zone in the intertidal range. It's covered with water during high tide, but that's really the only time that it's covered. So you could say that it's mostly dry and only covered with water for a tiny amount of time. So this has a really, really high salinity, so only a few organisms can survive here, because this is where all the salt deposits are left from those waves moving up and down. So only really two main organisms can live here. So the first one is barnacles, which you can see in the image on the top, and the bottom one are mussels. And then the mussels are actually adapted to prevent desiccation, which means drying out. So that's why they can live in this area that's not very covered with water very often. So that is our high tide zone. All right, I'm reading your comments before I move on. Salt does not have a smell. Yes, that's true. It can be difficult if you don't taste it, but I don't recommend tasting it. All right, mid-tide zone. So this is submerged in water for an equal amount of time that it's dry. So this is just a half and half kind of mix. So this one has less extreme temperatures, and because the sun does not beat down on it as hard for as long. And salinity is only a tiny bit higher than in regular ocean level, so it's a much more manageable part of the intertidal. However, this area has extreme wave action, so it's very difficult for those animals to grab on, which is why we have these three main animals that live here. So the first one that you can see in the top are crabs, and you might have seen a shell of those wash up on a beach. And then the bottom left, that's a hermit crab, which we said before. So those really like to inhabit the middle tide zone. And then something else called sea lettuce, which is in the bottom right. So those are the main organisms that can live in the mid tide zone. All right, I'm just going to take a break and read your comments. The only way is to follow the stream and see if it's connected to the ocean. That might take a while, but you can definitely try that. Yeah, definitely. So makes sense. You would have seen hermit crabs on the beach before. They literally love this zone. The alive one is so cute. I think both of these animals are actually alive in this photo. And crabs shed their skin. I don't know if they shed their skin, but I definitely knew that they shed their shells or change their shells when they get larger. It's very cool. Ezra, it's really cool that you have pet hermit crabs. Awesome. All right. And next. So the next one is the low tide zone. So this is a lot more manageable to live, which means that a lot more animals live here. So it's almost always submerged and only ever exposed at low tide. So that means that it's mostly covered with water and not really dry that often. So organisms that are living here are usually not well adapted to dryness and temperature extremes because they're so used to being under the water. But the competition is really high here due to a high volume of organisms. It's just a lot easier to live in this area of the intertidal than in any other. So some of the organisms that live here, and these are just going to go in order from top to bottom right. Anemones, sea cucumbers, or sorry, that one's actually the left middle. Sea stars, which is the middle right. Shrimp, which is the bottom right, sponges, which is the top right, and tube worms, which are the bottom left. And there's many, many more species. These are just the ones I could fit on this slide. So those are all the zones of the intertidal. I'm just going to take a look at your comments before I move on. Yeah, the shrimp is pretty cute. Definitely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about adaptations in the intertidal, because these animals really had to do a lot of adapting in order to live in such a harsh environment. So let's talk about those. So the first ones are kelps, which are in the top picture here. So some of the ways that kelp have adapted to be able to live in this area is they have a root system called holdfasts, and they can actually attach to rocks, mussels, and the seafloor to protect themselves from being dislodged by wave action. So that actually helps them to stay put when there's a whole bunch of waves and they're really knocking them around. They can hold really fast to the ground. And also kelp is really cool because it can lose up to 90% of its moisture in dry conditions and then reabsorb the water once the shore becomes inundated with water again. So if you ever see a little dry, flaky piece of kelp on the beach, and you think it's dead, it's actually not, because once the tide comes back in, that's going to reabsorb the water, and it's going to be perfectly fine again. So that's just something really, really cool, I think, about kelp. All right, and then the bottom one is called a strapweed, which is very similar to kelp, but it has a few differences. And one of them is something called these gas bladders, which are these little bubbles that you see, and that actually keeps them buoyant and allows them to float on the surface of the water, and that helps them to photosynthesize better. Something that helps them with reaching the surface of the water when they have to kind of be in a deeper part. All right, let's move on to animals, which are really cool. So the first thing are mussels, and I'm sure you guys have seen lots of mussels if you've ever been at a restaurant or if you've ever been at a beach. They're very specific types of shells. So the shell actually can hold small amounts of water to keep it moist during most dry periods. So that's a really cool adaptation that a lot of animals living with shells on the intertidal have. When the tide is high, they can take some water into their shells and hold it there until the tide becomes high again so that they don't dry out. Mussels also huddle together to reduce individual exposure to sunlight, which helps them stay cool as well. And that's why you always see mussels in kind of a mussel bed. So you don't really see a mussel by itself. The next one are sea stars. And sea stars have adapted to have these little tiny suctions on the bottom of their feet, and then they use those to grip really tightly to rocks to avoid being washed away. Hermit crabs, like we said before, its shell is pretty magic. It helps it maintain a pretty constant internal temperature, even though the temperature around them is really fluctuating all the time. So that keeps it nice and warm and cool depending on the external temperature. And just like the mussels, it can also carry water within its shell to keep it from drying out. So that's a really cool one as well. Sea cucumbers, when threatened, they can actually expel all their internal organs and then leave them for a predator while they escape, and then it can actually just grow back in a few days. So as we mentioned before, the sea cucumbers live in the low intertidal where there's a lot of predation, so they're actually going to need that defense mechanism in order to survive there, but it works really well for them, and then they can grow back all of their internal organs in just a few days. So that's pretty crazy. And the last thing are periwinkles. So those are the little snails that we saw in the first slide that live in the spray zone. So they can actually excrete mucus at low tide and hide in rock crevices to prevent from drying out. And that mucus allows them to hold water in their shells as well as stick to surfaces to prevent them from being washed away. So very, very cool adaptations from all of these animals. Okay, let me just look at your comments before I move on here. All right. Yes, that is definitely a kelp forest. That was exactly the title of the picture that I got it from. Crabs live in seaweed. Yep, sometimes actually a lot of things in the intertidal use seaweed as places to hide from predators and as well as habitats. So that includes crabs, and it also includes sea urchins. Byron says he loves sea cucumbers. Yeah, me too. They're really cool. Yes, save the planet. Yeah. Nice. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next slide here. And we actually have an activity coming up next. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to explain this activity to you. I should probably turn my camera back on. All right, there we go. Okay, so this activity is really cool. And this is called plant, animal, or non-living, and it's using a bunch of animals that we talked about from the intertidal, or not animals, plants, and non-living things that we talked about that are found in the intertidal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a specimen, and we're going to look at it together, and then I'm going to put up a poll, and I'm going to say, I'm going to ask you if it's a plant, an animal, or if it's not living at all. You're going to vote, and then we'll talk about what the right answer is and why it is, and where all these cool things were found. Isabel says, did I say sea cucumbers barf out their internal organs? Not really barf them out. They just kind of push them out of their body so that the predator can get that and they can actually still survive. Yeah, but it's a very interesting adaptation that they have that helps them survive in the lower intertidal. All right, so we are about ready to start the game. There are 12 different specimens I'm going to show you today. So the first one here is this guy. So we'll take a look at him for a minute. I'll show you what he looks like. And if you know what it is, don't type it in the chat. Just keep it to yourself from now. Oh, I think I spoke too late. And then I'm going to put up a poll while you're thinking, and then you're going to vote for whether you think it's a plant, an animal, or non-living. All right, so for this one, plant, animal, or non-living, what do we think? All right, I've got 7 votes, 8 votes. Perfect. All right, so it seems like we've got a very large amount of people saying that it is an animal. One person says plant, and then we will see what it is. So if you want to do a little drum roll there at home, you can do that. So this guy is actually a animal, just like most of you thought. Isabel was completely right. This is a sand dollar, and this was collected in Pictou, Nova Scotia. So this is actually an invertebrate animal, as you can probably imagine. There's really no place for a spine to go in here. And this guy builds its own shell with calcium carbonate, and it is related to the sea star. So if you were to think about where in the intertidal this guy would live, where do you think that this would be? So think about this sea star. Where do you think that this would be, if not in the intertidal? What zone? So if you remember our zones of the intertidal, maybe I'll put up one more poll, see if that works. So I'm just going to say, what zone of the intertidal do you think that this is from? So remember the choices are spray zone, low, mid, and high. Whoops, I had one more in there by accident, but don't vote for that one. So just a guess. Oh wow, that's very divided. All right, I've got 5 guesses for mid, 2 for low, and 1 for spray. So this guy would actually live in the low to mid intertidal. So if you said low or mid, you are actually both right. So since it's related to the sea star, it actually doesn't have really that many adaptations to be able to withstand temperature fluctuations or more salinity. So it's going to stay pretty low in the intertidal zone. So nice job, you guys, if you guessed right for both of those. This is our friend the sand dollar. It's going to go away, and we're going to move on to our next one. So here is our next guy. I'll show you it. This is what it looks like. This is the front, and this is the back. Show you one more time. All right, so now that you've gotten a good look, I am going to put up a poll. So you can just tell me if you think it is a plant, an animal, or something that is not alive, non-living. If you know what it is, keep it to yourself, because we'll find out in just a minute. Okay, so I've gotten 4 votes for plant, 2 votes for animal, and 1 for non-living. All right, it seems like plant is the highest amount of votes here. Nice. Okay, so do a little drum roll by yourself at home. So this guy is actually another animal. So this is called a brain coral. It's just a piece of it, and this was actually collected in the Caribbean. So this, if you said it was a plant, I don't blame you. It definitely looks like a plant, but this is actually an animal that grows in super large colonies. So they have algae cells in their bodies, which use the sun for energy and provide food to the coral in exchange for a safe home. So they have a symbiotic relationship with the algae that comes inside. So the reason why it's white now is because it's all that algae has been expelled, and that algae actually gives it its color. So this was a brain coral. Yeah, so and this is an animal because made up of little polyps, but we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. All right. Good guess for everyone. So this one is actually kind of difficult because this shell that we see here is made up of calcium carbonate, which is a mineral. So it definitely doesn't look like an animal, but it is. So it's very cool. All right, that one was our next one. Okay, what about this one? This is the front of it, and that's the back. This is how thin it is. So I'm gonna put up a poll. You guys can think to yourself while I type this out. Everyone knows what it is. Don't reveal it yet. I'm sure you know. All right. So I guess I'll wait until everyone's voted, until I reveal what it is. All right. So I've got most people voted. Whoops, I almost dropped it. So I have 8 votes for non-living and 1 vote for plant. So we'll see who is right. So this guy is non-living. This is our first non-living thing. This is sea glass, and it was collected in Bamfield, British Columbia, so all the way on the other side of the coast. So if you are a beachcomber, you would love to find this. So it's not as common as it once used to be, and maybe that's because we're a little bit better at recycling glass now, but it also could be because a lot more bottles are made of plastic. But sea glass actually happens when someone throws a glass bottle into the ocean or something made of glass into the ocean, and then it gets really smooth from erosion and weathering and a bunch of things, and tumbling through the ocean floor until it rolls up on the beach. So this is a piece of sea glass that is human-made, but it looks really cool since it's gone through that whole erosion process. So definitely makes sense if you thought this might be an animal or a plant, because it definitely looks really cool. I'm going to read your comments before I move on. Yes, Isabel knew what it was. Sea glass. Perfect. Byron found one on the beach. Yeah, they're not super common anymore, but it's very cool when you find a little piece of one. Nice. All right, we'll move on to our next one. So this one's really small. I'm gonna hope that you can see it. I'm just gonna hold it up to my camera. This is what it looks like. This is the back of it, I think I'm showing you, and this is the front. That's really cool, Isabel. You found red sea glass. I wonder what that came from. So it's very small. I know it's kind of, here, maybe if I do that, that might be a little bit easier for you to see. Anyways, okay, so that's the tiny little piece of something, but maybe you can guess just from that. So think about your answers while I type this out. All right, so what do we think? I'll hold it up again while you guess. Byron found a pink piece of sea glass. That's awesome. I always wonder the colored ones, what they came from, because it's not very common to see red or pink glass anymore. All right, Isabel thinks she knows what it is. Just keep it to yourself until after, and we'll find out. Oh, wine bottles. Yeah, it's a really good guess. I would probably say that as well. All right, so I have 6 people with non-living, 2 people with animal, and 1 person with plant. So let's see if the majority is going to win this time as well. So you can do a little drum roll. And this guy is actually an animal. So not the whole piece of an animal, but this is called a haddock otolith, which is just a fancy way of saying a fish ear bone. So this was actually collected in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is right here. And this guy is really, really, really cool and really good for scientists to use. So scientists actually study this part of a fish because it forms rings, just like a tree. So scientists can learn a fish's age by studying their ear bone. And they can also find out their movements and even where they were born just by looking at this tiny little bone. So I attempted to count how many there were, but this fish seems to be pretty old. So this is called a haddock otolith, if anybody is curious. It's very cool. I'm going to read the comments before we move on. Yeah, it's very cool. Byron asked, do I have any plants? I do have plants. You just have to be patient. All right, so here's the next one. And you can let me know what you think this one is. So this is the front. This is the back. And this is the side. So you can think a little bit while I put up the poll. So remember, if you know what it is, make sure you don't type it on the chat yet, because we want to make sure that everyone gets a good chance to guess before they know. All right, so there's the poll. It's very quick. All right, well, I've got 6 for animal, 3 for plant. Let's see what it is. You can do, 8 for animal, 1 for plant. And let's see what the answer is. So this is actually an animal. So although it might not look like it right now, this is actually a sea urchin, and this was collected in Peshena, British Columbia. So these marine animals are also related to the sea star, like we talked about before. And like their cousins, they use water pressure with tiny, tiny suction cup feet to move along the ocean floor. And actually, the reason why it doesn't really look like a sea urchin right now is because sea urchins lose their spines when they die and leave behind their tusks, which you see right here. So this is actually what a sea urchin looks like when it is no longer alive. So just like our friends the sand dollar and the sea star, they can't really survive in an area that has a lot of temperature changes and high salinity, so they stay mostly to the lower intertidal as well. So that's what this guy is. Oh, and I realized that I forgot to mention the last one. So the herrings actually are not really an intertidal animal. They live mostly in the open ocean, but near the coasts, if you were wondering. All right, so good job, everyone. That was awesome. I'm going to check the comments just before I move on here. Yes, there's a sea urchin. Nice job, everyone. Nice. It seems like everyone has found a sea urchin. That's awesome. I don't think I've ever found one myself. I've definitely seen one, but never found a dead one before. All right, so here is the next one. This is what the front of it looks like. This is what the back. And this is the side. It's very cool. Make sure that if you know, you keep it to yourself. You can think about your answer if you don't know. Then I will put up a poll. There you go. And you can let me know what you think this guy is. All right, I've got 5 for animal, 3 for non-living. Six for animal, 3 for non-living. So let's figure out what it is. Close that up. So this guy is another animal. So this is called a red abalone. This was found in Barkley Sound in British Columbia. So this is actually a piece of an abalone shell. So basically what this is a clam, but it only has a top shell, not a bottom shell. So these animals were actually really, really overhunted to the point that they were put on the endangered species list in Canada. But I think that their populations are slowly recovering. But of course, this was not taken from an alive one. This was just found on the beach. So don't worry, no red abalones were harmed in the collecting of this shell. So everyone who's an animal, congratulations. That's a really great, yeah, really great one. I won't ask you guys where you think that these ones are found in the intertidal, because these are actually very, very rarely found in the low intertidal, and they like to be in depths that are much, much, much lower. So that one's pretty cool. All right, next one. I'm going to put up a poll. Actually, not yet. So I imagine that a lot of you will have seen something like this before. Spin it around for you so you can see. Yeah, I imagine a lot of you might know what this one is. I'll put up a poll. If one of you have never seen any of that, like anything like that before, you can take a second while I type this out to think of your answer. It seems like a lot of people know. That's awesome. Isabel says it should be pink, and that's a really interesting comment. We'll talk about that in a second. So I've got 3 for plant, or 4 for plant, 4 for animal. Oh wow, it's a very even split. 1 for non-living. All right, so we got a tie here between plant and animal, 1 for non-living. So let's see who's correct with that one. So this guy is another animal. So this is called a branched coral, and it was collected in Barbados. So these types of corals are some of the fastest growing in the entire world, and they're super, super important reef building. So coral reefs, they have very intricate structure, and they provide habitat and refuge for juvenile fish and animals. Sorry, I had a hard time talking about that one. So yes, this is another type of coral, just like our brain coral, but it's a slightly different type than before. It's really important in reef building, like I mentioned before. Just because that's such an important ecosystem that houses so many different species. But yes, this is the same thing as the brain coral. It is an animal. So if you see all those tiny little holes in here, those are ones filled with polyps, which are the animal that live in coral, and they actually create this calcium carbonate shell. So like Isabel said, she said a really interesting comment about how it should be pink. And that's completely correct. And that's actually because they're missing the algae that's inside of the polyps that actually changes the whole color. So once they die, just like the other one, it actually turns, just like the sea urchin loses its spines, this actually turns white. So that's a really, really cool observation. Yeah, it's really cool how this is an animal. It doesn't seem like it would be, but it is. All right, so we've got 5 left. So here is the next one. These are going to get tricky now. So this is the front. This is the back. This is what it looks like from the side. So you guys can think about this one. This one's a little bit more tricky. Think about if it's a plant, an animal, or if it is not living at all. All right, so I've gotten, yes, I can show you again. So this is what it looks like. So I've got 2 for plant, 3 for plant, and 6 for animal. So let's see what this is. This guy is a plant. So it seems like it wouldn't be. It looks a lot like that coral that we saw before. But this is actually called coralline algae, which makes sense on why it actually looks like coral. This was collected in Herring Cove in Nova Scotia. So it's actually a type of seaweed that builds a really tough skeleton made of calcium to protect it from rough coastlines like we have here in Nova Scotia. So imagine that this was at the base of some seaweed that was holding it down into a rock or the bottom of the seafloor. And then you had, if you look here, you can see some of that reddish stuff. That's where that seaweed was originally attached, and that would grow upwards like this. But this is just what's left of it. This is just a little calcium shell that it used to protect itself from being uprooted from the ocean floor. So here's our first plant. If anyone was asking if we actually had any plants, yes, we do. So that was our first one. All right, so we have 4 more. I am going to put up, or I'll probably show you it first. So this is our next one. Hopefully you can see. Just put my hand back there so it's a little easier. To the back, side. That's what it looks like. All right, so I'm going to put up a poll so you guys can think about what your answer might be before I put up this little poll here. All right, so there's the poll. All right, I got 3 for plant, 1 for animal. Oh my goodness, 7 for plant, 1 for animal. I think I'm just waiting for one more person to vote. All right, we've got 8 people for plant, 1 person for animal. Let's see who's correct. So this guy is a plant. So this is called an encrusting coralline algae, and it was collected in Herring Cove in Nova Scotia. So you can see this white coating that covers the whole thing, especially over here, the stump. And this is what's left of the algae. It coats rocks in a really bright pink mass, and sometimes it's even growing on the shells of other animals. So it really just covers itself in this white calcium in order to preserve it. So as you can see, it even worked really well when it's dead because it is still preserved, and I don't even know how long ago this was collected. So very, very cool. All right, 3 left. Here is the next one. Oh, I'm going to look at the comments first before I move on. A lot of emojis. Okay, so this is our next one. This is what it looks like. The last one was a plant. It was called crystalline coralline algae. Sorry, encrusting coralline algae. And this is what it looks like from the side. So I'm going to put up a poll again. All right, what do we think that this one is? All right, got 3 for animal, 6 for animal, 1 for non-living, 8 for animal, 1 for non-living. Let's see who's correct, although I'm sure most of you already know. This is an animal, yeah. So this is called a keyhole limpet, and this was collected in Banfield of British Columbia. This is another marine animal that's related to a clam. So the keyhole limpet, like I showed you guys, has a little hole in the top, and that's to help it breathe. And then it has a really slanted shape, and that helps it withstand strong waves. So if it was facing the waves like this, the wave would kind of just brush right over it. So it's built this way so it's able to actually withstand some of that wave action that happens in intertidal. So definitely really cool. If you're wondering where the keyhole limpet lives, it's in the mid-tide section. So yeah, somewhere in the middle there. All right, 2 more. So this is the next one. So what do we think? You can think in your heads. I'm going to put up a poll. So what do we think? Animal or non-living? This one is kind of an easy one. All right. So all of you, unanimous response, voted for non-living. And that is completely correct. This is a fishing line. So fishing lines are found everywhere. So this is also known as monofilament. So fishing line in the ocean can wreak havoc on marine life. It's really, really hard for marine life to see. It's because it's clear, and imagine it being in water, it'd be even more difficult to see. It's really difficult for them to avoid because it's long and takes over 600 years to break down because it's made of plastic. So this is actually really, really detrimental to the environment, even though it doesn't look like it would really do much. It actually causes a lot of harm to a lot of species and biodiversity. So make sure if any of you are into fishing or any of your families are into fishing, make sure they never ever cut their fishing line loose because that is really, really bad for the environment. So this is found everywhere. This is fishing line. Look at your comments before I move on. I know it's very sad. Definitely does hurt animals, especially when it's all by itself. All right, and this is the last one, which I'm sure you guys can figure out. This is the front. This is the back. And this is the side. Well, I had to throw in a couple easy ones at the end there. This is our very last one. Yes, I will show you one more time. So there's the pole, and then this is what it looks like here. All right, I've got 6 for non-living, 1 for plant. I'm waiting for a couple more people to vote. 1 for plant, 1 for animal, and 7 for non-living. So this is non-living. This is a rock, and these are found everywhere. I actually picked this one up in PEI, and I think it's really cool because it's got some of that red on it on both sides. So did you actually know that rocks in the sea are heavier than rocks on land? It's a really, really cool fact. So for the same reason that water pools in the oceans, the elevation is lower down there. So heavier rocks will actually travel to the deepest ocean depths with the help of gravity. So that's just a pretty cool fact that I thought you guys might like to know. But yeah, this is just a rock. I'm sure you guys have really cool rocks as well. But this is my cool one. Byron has one that looks the same as this one. That's awesome. I thought it was cool as well. All right, so I want to thank you guys for playing that activity with me today. I have one more thing to do with you guys before we head out for the day. So one cool thing that Supernova has is something called a ROV. That stands for Remotely Operated Vehicle. They're used lots in ocean exploration by oceanographers to explore places where they actually cannot get to. So we have one that's really cool, and it explores. It can't go super deep because it's pretty small, but it can take some pretty cool footage of the intertidal. So we actually got a chance to drive this ROV, which we named Polaris, in the Halifax Intertidal, and we got some really, really cool footage that I want to show you guys today. And I have one more thing to show you first. So this I didn't include in our plant, animal, or non-living activity, but this is the shell of a periwinkle snail, in case you're wondering what it looked like. It's a little pointy on top and pretty small. All right, so I'm going to show you this video now, and I am going to kind of narrate what's going on as we do it as well. So I'm gonna turn off my video and share my screen just so it's easier for you guys to see. All right, so let me know when you guys can see that. Just type a yes. Okay, great. Thank you, Isabel. All right, I'm gonna put that in full screen so we can see and restart that. So this is Supernova content, definitely. All right, so here we are. We're right at the Halifax Harbourfront here, and if you look really closely, you can see that entire post is full of mussels and starfish and sea urchins. It's really, really cool. You can also, if I go back, you can also see a something called a nematode, which is right here. Or sorry, a nudibranch, which is right here. It's a little ocean worm. They're all over the intertidal. and it's going to pan over, and you can see some of that that algae and vegetation that's in the ocean as well. It's very, very cool. So there's all those blue mussels. And something that's cool about the those starfish and blue mussels is that blue mussels are the main prey of sea stars. So what they're actually doing is probably eating those mussels as they're on top of them there at that post. So yes, this is Polaris. It's just driving through, taking a little look at the post there. You can get a really good view of that nudibranch that's right there on the post. I don't know if you guys can see it. Oh, and it's really hard to drive Polaris, so sometimes we bump into the post, but luckily we didn't harm anything, which is great news. And then if we look up, we can see some of that sea lettuce that's right at the edge of the dock there, and lots more mussels on the side there. They are all clumped together. This is actually near the dingle. This is a different area of the intertidal, but as you can see when we land there, there's a whole bunch of sea urchins. And you can see a couple of blue mussels, but usually you don't find too many of them on their own because they like to huddle in order to keep cool. And you can see a bunch of those periwinkle snails there. This is more of a rocky intertidal, so you can see a bunch of different types of things here. On those rocks, you can probably see some lichen. It's a little bit low for them, but they can also thrive in an underwater environment as well. So more of those mussels all together, and you can see an urchin there with some leaves stuck to it. I'm sure those spikes are really difficult for it to not collect debris. There's some more of those mussels that have really gotten into those crevices in those rocks. Oh, and there's some kelp. Kelp is super, super important for an ocean ecosystem. Oh, and there's Polaris turning around. All right, so now we're getting into the pretty shallow water. It's right on the top, which is why you can see it kind of moving with the surface water. So there you can see a lot of red algae and a lot of green algae and sea lettuce. Oh, so whenever Polaris wants to dive or turn, it releases a lot of bubbles. So that's what that just was. But as you can see here, the intertidal really drops off quickly. So actually what's happening here is someone's just pulling it back in. But that is the end of our video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Let me turn my camera back on. I just think that's really, really cool, and it's really awesome to see Polaris in action. So this it concludes our webinar. I really hope you guys enjoyed it today. This was, I think, our last Supernova webinar of the week, so I really hope you enjoyed them if you came to all three, or even if you just came to this one or a couple of them. But it's not all over yet, because on Saturday we have a couple events going on. So if you want to stop by the Halifax waterfront in the market, in the Seaport Market, I'm going to be at a table there, and we're going to be playing an activity that's very similar to the one that we did today. And there'll be other things there too, like Autobots. And you can get a really, really cool pin and a cool bookmark. And if you're interested in seeing more about the ROV that Polaris, our Polaris ROV, you can go down to the Halifax waterfront where someone else will be actually driving it, and you can see what the footage looks like really, really live. So that's cool. So I hope that you guys really enjoyed, and thank you so much for joining with me today, and I hope you liked learning all about the intertidal. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.